Well. Happy Friday, everybody. We are back for Coop's Fantasy Football Fiasco. I'm with Fantasy Alarm, sponsored by FFPC. Today, part two of our solo crazy breakdown of free agency and the draft. Last week, we looked at the NFC teams, right? We went through team by team and just kind of broke down what happened in free agency, what it means for fantasy, and what's left that they could do in the NFL draft, right? And for our purposes, we're going to look at the picks they have in the first three rounds just because the hit rates are a lot higher. I mean, historically, you'll see guys every once in a while, a Stephon Diggs or a Puka Nakua come from day three. But for the most part, those first three rounds are where teams go out and they fill needs, right? They go out and they say, okay, we're going to use this pick on a position of need and it's going to be impactful right away. So that's what we're going to look at. And why don't we get right into it? Because we got 16 teams to look at, only an hour. Last week, we did go slightly over an hour. So I'm trying to keep it close to an hour for you guys. So let's get started. Baltimore Ravens. Producer Matt's going to bring up the picks they have so you can see them right on the screen. Hopefully make it a little easier for you guys. We have the ticker run at the bottom too. But Ravens kind of playing it low key here, right? They do have 3 picks in the first 100. Nice. So they can make moves there, right? They're not going to draft a quarterback. Well, let's go through what they did first, and then we'll get to that. So kind of quiet in free agency. They lost Gus Edwards. He followed Greg Roman to the Chargers, but they brought in Derrick Henry, right? Derrick Henry, to me, this is kind of the perfect fit for him because he doesn't really catch passes, but Lamar Jackson doesn't really dump it down a ton. Like, he doesn't actively look for the running back. He likes to take it himself, or he likes to throw it downfield. But Todd Monken does call a lot of running back screens, and Derrick Henry's good at those. So he's going to benefit from the RPO, the run pass option with Lamar Jackson. He's a big bruiser, so he can score those touchdowns, and he's still going to get screens. So Derrick Henry, this is as good of a landing spot as you're going to get from him. And it also kind of saves us from other backs going there. Like, if a guy like Austin Eckler went there, I'd be a little disappointed because we count on Eckler to catch a ton of balls. And when you have a mobile quarterback and you have a system like this, it's not conducive to catching passes. So Derrick Henry went exactly where I wanted him to go. Good spot there. They lost Devin Duvernay. He's more of just a return guy at this stage. That's what he's going to do for the Jaguars. Now they lost guard John Simpson, is what it is. They're expected to lose Tyler Huntley, though at this stage, Tyler Huntley kind of missed the boat to some degree on the possibly being a starting quarterback, right? I mean, the odds weren't that good to begin with, but where could he even really go now where he can compete? I think his best bet is honestly to go to a team that's looking to draft a guy and just hope that guy face plants, right? Like, you look like where Sam Darnold went, where Jacoby Brissett went. That's where Huntley probably should do. They did sign they signed Josh Johnson as their backup, so they have a backup for Lamar Jackson, right? So this team, the one thing that they didn't really do that I thought they might do is kind of go for a wide receiver too. So good news for Rashad Bateman that they didn't, right? So they're going to bring back, they're bringing back Nelson Aguilar. Odell's probably gone, but they left the door open to him possibly coming back. But it's Zay Flowers, it's Rashad Bateman, it's Mark Andrews. Now, in the draft, as you can see on the screen, they pick at 30, they pick at 62, they pick at 93. Maybe they do go for a wide receiver, but probably unlikely at this stage. And, running back is still on the table as well. Maybe they go for running back, but they probably won't go for tight end. But I did see they met with Jatavian Sanders. If they draft Jatavian Sanders, I'm going to lose my mind because they already have in my mind, three good tight ends that should be working out somewhere, right? They've got Mark Andrews, who's a stud. They have Isaiah Likely, who proved while Andrews was out that he was good. And I also like Charlie Kohler. So if they sign Jatavian Sanders, I'm going to lose it, man. So that's my one wish for this team. Do not bury another tight end for us in Dynasty. So that's the Baltimore Ravens. Next team here, Buffalo Bills, another team that just is kind of trying to hold it together. They lost Jordan Poyer. He went to the Dolphins. They lost Gabe Davis. They lost Trent Sherfield. To me, as somebody who hasn't been a huge Gabe Davis believer, or that Gabe Davis can be great for fantasy, I think for NFL purposes, having a guy that can score touchdowns and take the top off the defense, right, is a valuable commodity, right? He's going to do that for the Jaguars, but I really don't think his play style is conducive to a lot of targets. And I personally wouldn't have paid him 3 years, 39 million. So Gabe Davis being gone, no big deal. They replaced him as a field stretcher with Mac Hollins, 1 year, 2.6 million. And then they brought in Curtis Samuel for 3 years, 24 million. That signing is really interesting to me because I figured they were just going to go and spend up on one outside wide receiver to line up opposite Stephon Diggs because they have Dalton Kincaid and they have Dawson Knox. They can mix and match inside. They don't really need a additional slot wide receiver, but that's exactly what Curtis Samuel is. In my opinion, as a Dalton Kincaid fan, I'm worried that Curtis Samuel is going to hurt his slot snaps, is going to hurt his alignment and push him in line or even have him rotating with Dawson Knox, which is not what we needed. I mean, so I really did not like that for fantasy football purposes. Also, I mean, it gives Curtis Samuel a good opportunity if he can carve out and be the second target on the team behind Stephon Diggs. But that's the battle now. To be the second target, it's Curtis Samuel versus Dalton Kincaid. And with the picks they have 2 picks in the top 100. So picks 28 and 60, and then they don't pick again until like the 4th or 5th round. They could draft a wide receiver there. I don't foresee them doing it. I think they probably just stick with what they have. But their running back, James Cook, big winner so far, honestly, because they could have brought in a bruiser to supplement him. There were plenty of those guys out there, right? Like he's a good pass catching back. I was a little worried they could bring in, at the high end, Derrick Henry, but he got paid more money. But they could have brought in an AJ Dillon. They could have brought in a Donta Foreman. They didn't do that, right? So I think that maybe they could still draft a running back, but you have to look at James Cook as a winner so far, just considering all the potential bruiser back options there were. Gus Edwards, there were a lot, right? And they didn't go for any of them. So that's got to be pretty good for them there. So yeah, I'm hoping the Bills just stick with what they have because, I personally, I'm rooting for Dalton Kincaid. I'll admit it. But with the Curtis Samuel addition, that is a little bit of a knock to him. And if they draft a wide receiver at 28, that would be another big red flag there. So that's what we got to look for the draft. For Cincinnati Bengals, they did a lot here, right? They tagged T. Higgins, but T. Higgins is not happy playing on the tag. He looked at what happened with Michael Pittman, where the Colts tagged Michael Pittman and then they gave him a big contract, basically said they want to keep him around. T. Higgins is looking at that and saying, why not me? And now he's even doing interviews saying, here's a list of guys I want to play for, right? I want to play with Lamar Jackson. I want to play with, Jalen Hurts. He's naming off guys that he wants to go and play with. That's not a good sign for the Bengals. I mean, you're going to make this guy stay and play for 1 year when he doesn't want to be there and he's worried about getting hurt and worried about his future. I don't know. Hopefully they figure out a long-term deal to keep him because, I have no problem with Higgins and Chase. It obviously hurts whatever the third wide receiver and the tight end is, but who cares? But yeah, he's on. I mean, it's realistically possible that he could get moved, right? They're expected to lose Tyler Boyd. Tyler Boyd's one I'm keeping an eye on. Tyler Boyd, there's very few people that believe that he can bounce back. But here's how I look at it. Tyler Boyd, when he was the wide receiver 2, and he was playing a full snap share, basically in 2 wide receiver sets playing flanker, and then he would move into slot for 3 wide receiver sets. Tyler Boyd did this when he played with AJ Green. He did it when he played with T. Higgins. And in those 2 seasons, he had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, right, when he was a full-time player. Then they brought in Jamar Chase, and now you sit there and your offensive coordinator, your coach, you say, what 2 wide receivers should be on the field for 2 wide receiver sets? It's going to be T. Higgins. It's going to be Jamar Chase. That makes Tyler Boyd a part-time player. Even when this team uses a lot of 3 wide receiver sets, you're going to use Drew Sample. You're going to use some of these blocking tight ends at times. You're going to have 2 running back sets. He's the guy that comes out of the game. If another team now wants to go to Tyler Boyd and say, hey, you know what? I know you were just a slot guy last couple of years. You can come play for us and be a full-time player. He could have new upside. He's only 29 years old. I mean, he's younger than Tyreek Hill, who is going off the board as the wide receiver 1. He's younger than Amari Cooper. He's younger than Adam Thielen and DeAndre Hopkins, all these guys that had 1,000-yard seasons. Tyler Boyd could have a bounce back here and could have a 1,000-yard season if he lands in the right spot. I mean, if the Arizona Cardinals sign him and say, hey, you know what? Come on in. He could be their best wide receiver on their team, right? You would have Michael Wilson as a split end, and then Tyler Boyd would be an every down player as a slot flanker for that team. And then Trey McBride would obviously be the tight end. So I think McBride is locked in somewhere there, but Michael Wilson versus Tyler Boyd, I think Tyler Boyd could be in line for a lot of targets. So very interested to see what happens with Tyler Boyd. This team also, I didn't believe it was going to happen. I thought they were going to keep Joe Mixon. They traded Joe Mixon. They said they were going to cut him. The Texans swooped in and said, hey, we'll take him. Texans took him, even gave him an extension. They brought in Zach Moss to compete with Chase Brown. I actually am going to rank Mixon ahead of Zach Moss this year simply because Zach Moss completing with Chase Brown scares me a little bit. And I like the Texans setup for Mixon. We'll get to the Texans shortly. I'll talk about that there. Besides that, the Bengals signed Mike Gesicki, which they liked Tanner Hudson. So basically they said, hey, is there a better version of Tanner Hudson out there, a tight end that we can run out of the slot? And they went out and grabbed Gesicki. If they do trade T. Higgins, now we're looking at Gesicki as a guy that we can draft in redraft and possibly have some upside there. If they're going to have Chase and Higgins, then he's in the same spot as a lot of these guys like Dallas Goedert, where he needs someone to get hurt to have high-end upside. So that's kind of it with this team. They could draft a wide receiver. We've seen this narrative pan out a million times where a team knows the wide receiver is leaving next year, so they draft another one, right? Or they know they're aging out or whatever. They draft another one and have him learn as the third guy, and then he takes over that role. That's what the Seahawks are doing. They had DK Metcalf. They knew Tyler Lockett was getting up there, 31 years old. They drafted Jackson Smith and Jigba. As Lockett goes into the sunset, next guy comes up. They could easily do that. So if you look at this and say, oh, they're not going to draft a wide receiver because they have two, that's not how it works in the NFL a lot of times. They could go out and draft a high-end wide receiver, especially, a field stretching type guy or another split end. They could also draft a tight end. If Brock Bowers is there at 18, I know people would be pretty fired up about that. For redraft, I wouldn't love it if Higgins is there, but for the future, when Higgins is gone, it's going to end up being great. But we want our guy to be a top 2 target on the team. So that's why I don't love that short-term landing spot. Next team, Cleveland Browns. The big move they made this offseason, trading for Jerry Jeudy, and they immediately extended him too. People are a little confused by the move there, but they've done their homework on the player. Whatever meetings and conversations they had over the first week or whatever, Jeudy must have crushed because they extended him, and that to me says that they are not confident in Elijah Moore and what he can do out of the slot. I mean, it's just the overlapping skill sets for those two players means that Elijah Moore is in trouble. Cedric Tillman is still going to be the kind of third fiddle field stretching guy. But again, you really, on most teams, it's in virtually all cases, a team has 2 at most fantasy relevant pass catchers when you put all the tight ends and wide receivers into a bundle. Every once in a while, you have a quarterback go out and throw 55 touchdowns like Peyton Manning, and now all of a sudden you have all sorts of great options. But for the most part, it's 2 guys at most. So when you sit there, Amari Cooper is going to be one, right? After that, it's now Jerry Jeudy versus David Njoku to lead that, to be the second target getter on that team for fantasy relevance. And you have to kind of pick, right? Njoku, he got a lot of screens last year, but that was an Alex Van Pelt's scheme. Alex Van Pelt now obviously left to be the offensive coordinator for the New England Patriots. So who knows how that's going to shake out. Also, Deshaun Watson didn't target the tight end as much as the backups did. Guys like Flacco, guys like PJ Walker, they were throwing the ball. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, they were throwing the ball to Njoku at a greater clip than Watson. So I'm actually probably going to be fading David Njoku a little bit here. If you truly think that Jerry Jeudy is bad, then lean into that and draft Njoku, right? If you truly think Judy's going to faceplant, then you can get value there. But for me, I think Njoku is just going to go too high based on how he finished last year, when the reality is that he's probably the third target on the team now. For other minor moves, they lost backup tight end Harrison Bryant. He went to the Raiders, so he's comfortable being the guy that skews blocking. Michael Mayer's probably going to be the guy there. Donta Foreman signed with the Browns. So while Nick Chubb's coming back from the knee injury, they have a big bruiser to do the short yardage work. I think it's a good signing for them. Jameis Winston was signed as the backup, and I think that's, if they couldn't get Flacco back, then that's a solid pick there. And there's going to be with probably for the rest of the career for Deshaun Watson, there will be a contingency of fans that just are going to root for the backup to get the job, and they're going to root for him to fail just because of the off-field situation with him. But on-field wise, as much as I hate to say it, fantasy points don't care about that, right? Like there have been some villains in the NFL and some guys that we might not have loved off the field that have put up huge numbers on the field. Le'Veon Bell said a lot of things that were controversial, whatever. LaShawn McCoy, those guys put up fantasy points, right? Like it is what it is, right? So like Deshaun Watson historically is a top 6 or so guy in fantasy points per game among all quarterbacks ever. He just got an addition of Jerry Jeudy. They didn't lose a lot of the weapons they have, so he's a buy in Dynasty, as much as I hate to say it. So there you go. Fantasy points, it is what it is. They're probably, with picks 54 and 85, they're probably not going to be able to do too much difference making wise, but they don't really need to, right? If anything, they might draft a running back, but they're not going to go for a quarterback. They just traded for wide receiver to fix that problem. They have David Njoku, so they're not going to go out, probably not going to go out and draft a tight end. Maybe they will, but it's not like that guy's going to come in and be fantasy relevant right away. So running back's probably the only thing you could see with one of those first 2 picks there that's going to move the needle. So we'll keep an eye on that. Next team, Denver Broncos, on the other side of this Jerry Jeudy trade and doing a lot of crazy stuff. And I'll tell you what, if you're a Broncos fan, you got to pick a side right now, right? The worst thing one of these teams can be is down the middle, where you bring in a big name guy like Sean Payton that wants to do things his way and limit his ability to do things his way, right? That's the worst thing that you can do, because now you've bought into the idea, but you're not going to give him the tools that he needs, right? It's like the Bill Parcells when he said, if you're going to have me cook the dinner, then you at least let me buy the groceries, right? That's with Sean Payton right now. They're letting him buy the groceries. For better or worse, you either have to be on board with them giving him that reign and letting him do his thing, or you are part of the contingency that says Sean Payton was nothing without Drew Brees, and we just need him out of here as soon as possible. But for now, the way I look at it as a unbiased witness is I'm saying, hey, you know what? Let him cook. Let him do his thing. If you think Russ and Judy, if he thinks those guys are bad attitude guys or they're not fitting in, get him out. If he wants to bring in little Jordan Humphrey and Adam Trotman and Michael Burden and everybody that ever played for the Saints for him, and Michael Bandy, who played for Joe Lombardi with the Chargers, if he thinks those are good character guys and they're going to help the team, then let him do it, and let him build the team his way. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And then you just cut bait with him and you go. But in this league, the worst thing you can be is wishy-washy and down the middle. So this year is probably going to be bad for the Broncos as they go through this transition. But on the other side, it's going to be built the way that they want it to be built, right? So I'll tell you, with all the moves here, it's good for Jarrett Stidham and whoever is going to get a chance to potentially start for this team. It's good for Courtland Sutton or at least Courtland Sutton stays where he was, right? Because he was already the split end. He's still the split end. It's great for Marvin Mims because there were quotes from Sean Payton back in October where he essentially said, somebody asked, why doesn't Marvin Mims play more? And he essentially said that it's difficult to get them both on the field at the same time due to overlapping skill sets. And when you have the big split end and you use blocking tight ends and you use fullback Michael Burton, right? It's you can't just go out and have multiple flankers on the field at the same time. So it makes sense. If you're going to have Judy out there, it's hard to get Mims out there at the same time. Now they can do that, right? So definitely with no Judy, more work for Mims. So Mims is trending up. We'll see if it pans out, but he should get more opportunity. And then Greg Dulcich, I mean, as of right now, he didn't play virtually all of last year because of the hamstring issues. If he can get healthy, he's in a good spot. But keep in mind that George Patton has said, the GM has said that they need to figure out the position. And he even mentioned, he goes, I know Greg's been hurt, but we need somebody that can help us over the middle. So don't rule out drafting a tight end as well. So they have picks 12 and 76. Quarterback is on the table at 12. No question. Wide receiver now potentially on the table, but I wouldn't do that if I were them. I would just roll and see what you have with Mims. And then tight end, of course, is on the table as well. If you're a Javonte Williams fan, the offseason so far has gone well for you because there was a real possibility that Joe Lombardi could have brought his old friend Austin Eckler in. Austin Eckler signed with a team that has an early down back in Brian Robinson. He could have brought in Antonio Gibson, who signed with the Patriots. They didn't. This team last year led all teams in passes to the running back combined between Samaje Perine and Javonte Williams combined number one, right? And they were Joe Lombardi was number one at times with the Chargers. He was number one with the Saints when he had Alvin Kamara, and he was number one with the Lions when they had like Joik Bell and Reggie Bush and Theo Riddick, 156 targets to the running back then. They had 154 last year with the Broncos. So whoever's in that running back room, just know catching a lot of passes is on the table. Even Samaje Perine or and whoever's a secondary passing down back. So not a bad spot if you're looking for full PPR fill-ins, right? So that's what I think with the Broncos. 12-76. They probably should draft a quarterback, no doubt about it. But tight end is another spot they might go, and maybe they do go out and go for a new, pass catching back. We'll have to see. Next team up, Houston Texans, right? This team did the smart thing this offseason. They focused on defense. When you hit on all these guys, on the CJ Strouds and the Tank Dells and Nico Collins, kind of, after 2 down years of being hurt, comes out and has a great year. When all that comes together, then you lean on that by focusing on the defense and say, hey, you know what? We hit on a bunch of offense. Let's try and hit on some defense here. They did trade for Joe Mixon. They let Devin Singletary walk. And I love this spot for Mixon. Here's why. With San Francisco, right? They use heavy sets. They focus on having an elite left tackle and using a fullback, right? At left tackle, they have Trent Williams. And then at fullback, they have Kyle Juszczyk. That's the setup of that offense. And Mike McDaniel went to the Dolphins. And the first thing he did with that same scheme is go out and get Teron Armstead, the highest paid available free agent lineman that year, and then sign Alec Ingold at fullback and do the same thing. And look, the running backs ran crazy last year, ran all over everybody, big touchdowns, hanging a billion points on the Broncos. So what happens next? The Texans say, we want to do that too. And they bring in Bobby Slowick and D'Amico Ryans. Bobby Slowick, is the offensive side, D'Amico Ryans defensive side, but they're both from the 49ers. And what do? Well, they already have Laramie Tunsil, who actually was voted ahead of Teron Armstead for the Pro Bowl. And then they go out and sign Andrew Beck at fullback instead of the same thing. Very conducive to rushing upside. Joe Mixon comes in, and he's a good scheme fit for that. And they're going to use the fullback. They're going to use all that stuff. They have a good quarterback. I don't see why Joe Mixon wouldn't once again, as long as he's healthy, be good for fantasy football. And for 3 straight years, he's been top 10 in PPR, right? He's changed the narrative on a guy that used to be injury prone. Now he's not. And this is a great spot for him, probably even better than the Bengals, to be honest. So, I mean, Joe Mixon, kind of a winner here, in my opinion. Assuming people talk about how he's inefficient, this or that. I mean, at the end of the day, the guy does get the job done. So we'll have to see with that. But yeah, I don't mind that one bit. They brought back Noah Brown to be the 3rd wide receiver. Keep in mind, folks, that when you use a fullback, someone comes out of the game and it's almost always the 3rd wide receiver. That's why with the 49ers, Juwan Jennings doesn't matter. With the Dolphins, Braxton Berrios doesn't matter. With this team, when Nico Collins and Tank Dell are healthy, the 3rd wide receiver is not going to play that much, which is kind of interesting that they were looking at Keenan Allen supposedly to potentially bring him in because it would have probably made Tank Dell a part-time guy. It's just that for the short term at least, right? So interesting. And I agree, Dustin. I think that the Texans are going to win that division, if you ask me. They would be my pick. So go Texans. Yeah. They could draft a running back, with you look at, Joe Mixon getting up in there in age and what the mix they have. They have picks 42, 59, and 86, as you can see on the screen right here. So they could draft a running back, but maybe not. They probably going to continue to focus on defense. They're probably not going to draft a wide receiver. Maybe they go out and get the best fullback out there and upgrade over Andrew Beck. I try to look at the grades and stuff for Pro Football Focus, but it's so hard to get a read on who's a really good fullback or not. We know Juszczyk is, we know Patrick Ricard, we know Alec Ingold, but like after that, I don't know if Andrew Beck's amazing or not. So maybe they do go out and get a fullback, but not going to be super impactful for fantasy football. And so I'll tell you what, with this setup, right? CJ Stroud, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Dalton Schultz is a guy that I don't love in redraft, but he still, is going to get touchdowns from time to time. When everyone was healthy, he was only getting 4.4 targets a game. When Nico Collins or Tank Dell were out of the game, he was getting 7 targets a game. So Tank Dell were kind of fading. But here's the thing. With this team right now, the pieces are kind of set in place. we can draft these guys with confidence early in drafts. And where I'm taking advantage of that right now is best ball drafts. FFPC right now already has their way too early best ball drafts, but it's never way too early for us because we're plugged in. We're talking about this stuff in March and we're taking advantage of it. So, what I like to do in these best ball drafts is first I go over to my FFPC, use promo code Coop, where they'll give me 25 bucks when I deposit 35 or more if I'm a first time player. So I take advantage of that first, go get set up. And then what I do is early on in drafts, I just draft stars. And then after that, I focus on guys where I can be confident their role is not going to change, where they're locked in. I look at these guys like Joe Mixon. He's going to start for this team. Nico Collins and Tank Dell are the two outside guys, and they're going to use a fullback, which is going to consolidate the targets there. I start focusing on those guys, right? Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, same thing. They're not going anywhere. I get as many of those guys as I can. And then later on in the draft, that's when I start just leaning into uncertainty. And I start picking these rookies that I think could have an impact, or I start picking guys where I look at it and say, okay, what if they draft somebody, but what if they don't? Then now this guy steps up. Now Marvin Mims steps up and he has a big role. So that's kind of the formula I've been using. If you want to take advantage of that and the information from this show right now, go over to myffpc.com, use promo code Coop. First time depositors, they'll give you 25 bucks when you deposit 35 or more. We're going to take advantage of all this stuff. That's why we're talking about it now. And then we have the draft coming up. And because we're talking about good landing spots, bad landing spots, we'll take advantage of it in our rookie drafts too. So that's the Texans. That's FFPC. Let's move on to the Colts. The Colts here, I think the questions that they kept Michael Pittman, biggest and best move. I love Michael Pittman. I think he's a star and incredibly valuable that he can play split end and tether his foot to the line of scrimmage. That makes things so much easier for everyone else. You have to have 7 guys tethered to the line. The fact that he can fist fight the jam and tether his foot means that you can have smaller wide receivers on the field at the other spots. Guys like Josh Downs can take a step back off the line, go in motion. They don't get jammed up, right? Smaller players. Alec Pierce is a bigger player on the outside. That's the question mark for me. And that's the question for this year. Alec Pierce ran the most routes of any wide receiver in the league last year, and he finished as wide receiver 71 in fantasy football. 71. Led the league in routes run, 71. To me, that is, I mean, I don't have to explain why that's the biggest example of inefficiency there is out there. So this team, I feel, in my opinion, if he doesn't take a step forward early, they need to flip the snaps for Josh Downs and Alec Pierce. And what you're going to have, what you had last year was in 2 wide receiver sets, it was Pittman and Pierce, and then Downs would come in and play slot for 3 wide. What if Pierce doesn't take a step forward, it should be Pittman on one side and Downs on the other side. And because in a lot of those formations, you're using 2 tight ends anyway, Downs doesn't have to be tethered to the line, right? And then when you go to 3 wide, then you move Downs inside and bring Pierce in on the outside. That's what a lot of teams do. Garrett Wilson and CeeDee Lamb and Keenan Allen and Cooper Kupp and Chris Godwin, they play slot when there's 3 guys out there, 3 wide receivers, but in 2 wide receivers, they stay out there. And that's what I want to see for this year. So we're going to find out fairly early who's going to be playing what role, but that's where the upside for Josh Downs comes from if it happens. And if Alec Pierce takes a step forward, there could be upside for him as well, you know? So that's how we're going to look at that situation. They lost Gardner Minshew to, they lost him to the Raiders. He's going to probably be the starter for that team. We'll talk about him later. They lost Zach Moss to the Bengals. He earned it while Jonathan Taylor was hurt. But when Jonathan Taylor's healthy, it's the Taylor show. So they weren't going to pay Zach Moss to be a backup. Glad he was able to prove that he deserves money, man. Like, I love it's good. It's great to see guys like that get paid, man. Because to us, we look at the contracts and we're like, this guy got $4 million, $8 million. $8 million changes your life. $1 million does. And I know it's all relative because of what these guys do for work, but Zach Moss getting $8 million is life-changing money for him. So congratulations to him. And it'll be interesting to watch him with the Bengals, see what he does over there. Isaiah McKenzie, we talked about him when we did our preview of free agency, that he was done because he got suspended for conduct detrimental to the team, where they basically said, like, you're not playing for us for the rest of the year because he broke some sort of rules. He's been like teasing it on Twitter. He's like, I got a story to tell, blah, blah, blah. Netflix, get on that. BJ Levin, I would love for, maybe I'll hit him up. He makes documentaries, see if he can get something done there. But like, I want to know what happened. But he was gone. And he went back to play with Brian Dable. We'll talk about him in a little bit. But yeah, they Colts also brought in Joe Flacco as a backup. I think that's smart, right? Anthony Richardson's the guy. There's been debates across the board on whether being a mobile quarterback makes you more or less injury prone, right? Which to me, you know what? The studies say that it doesn't make you more injury prone. That's fine. But what does that mean? That they're just exactly as injury prone as every other quarterback, where a lot of quarterbacks got hurt last year? Then yeah, I mean, like they're going to stay in the pocket or they're going to go on the move. Either way, it creates, they play football. So you got to have somebody that can step in and lead this team. If someone wants to give Minshew $25 million, then you got to find somebody else. Joe Flacco coming in, great decision there. The question, so I look at picks 15, 46, 82, probably not going to take a running back, not going to take a quarterback. I don't really see a need to take wide receiver, but maybe tight end is where maybe, because like Jelani Woods missed the whole season last year. Kylan Granson isn't the answer. He's gotten a million opportunities. As much as I was a Kylan Granson fan, he's gotten a lot of chances. Will Mallory, probably too young to just really come in and just take over as a starter. Mo Alley Cox is more of just a blocking tight end. Like, this is a spot where, you bring in the right guy, and now you can release some of these other guys and free up a lot of roster spots. So tight end is the kind of the impact move there, though I can see them going just offensive line and defense. We're gonna take these picks and talk about what might happen for fantasy football, but just keep in mind that like not every team is going to draft a running back or wide receiver. So there you go. Next team, Jacksonville Jaguars. They a big one here. Lost Calvin Ridley. He got paid a lot of money, a lot more money than I thought he was going to. He got paid the big bag at 29 years old, right? So, I mean, Gabe Davis to me is a downgrade, as flat out. So I don't think that, Trevor Lawrence, great player, could take a step forward just, as you get better and we have to keep in mind that these young guys could get better as they keep practicing and stuff, but anytime there's a downgrade in the weapons, we have to be a little concerned. Obviously they still have Engram, they have Christian Kirk. Gabe Davis is going to stretch the field on the outside. They gave him, 3 years, $39 million, but he's not Calvin Ridley. So, Trevor Lawrence should still be fine. They brought in Devin Duvernay, mostly a return man at this point. They retained Dearness Johnson, which is good news if you're a Travis Etienne fan. If you are a fan of a running back for fantasy football, you want the team bringing in guys that are non-threatening, right? You want teams bringing in guys that you don't think could possibly take over that job. So if the backfield is once again Travis Etienne and Dearness Johnson and Tank Bigsby, that's good news. What you didn't want is what happened in Washington, where they brought in Austin Eckler. And now they said Brian Robinson is going to get the early downs. Austin Eckler is going to get the pass downs. That's a nightmare, right? There's a lot of guys like Tajay Spears. We're going to talk about him coming up shortly, like nightmare situation. So it's so far been good news for Travis Etienne. They could still draft somebody, but even then, give me the guy that they have. Give me the incumbent guy that I've seen do well up against a rookie anytime. Even we've seen it with Chris Carson when he was with the Seahawks. Good running back. They draft Rashad Penny in the first round, and it just turns out that Penny's a rookie and Carson was better. And that's how it goes. I know Carson suffered the neck injury, but you know what? I'll take a guy that I like against a rookie any day of the week. So could draft a wide receiver. Probably not going to draft a tight end because they drafted one last year and they have Ingram. And running back, maybe. We'll see. But wide receiver is where I could see them making a move here, which would make a lot of sense to have Gabe Davis as kind of your wide receiver 3 with Christian Kirk in the slot and another guy outside. So that's it for the Jags. Kansas City Chiefs, the champs, man. And this is what happens when you're the champion, right? This is what happens when you're one of the top dogs and you're once again the favorite to win and you have a great quarterback, is that players will take discounts. They will take discounts for whatever reason of their own. And there are many different reasons, right? Number one, we always look at it and say, okay, some guys want to win a ring, right? And so you go to one of the favorites. You go play with Patrick Mahomes and try and get yourself a ring, right? Other guys look at it and they say, oh, if I just go and take a 1-year cheap deal and play with Patrick Mahomes, then I'll get a bunch of passes. And then after that, I'll take those stats and I'll go get paid big money. And that's exactly what Juju Smith-Schuster did. And he wasn't even that good. He had like 900 yards with the Chiefs, and he turned around and got paid a big bag, like $33 million. You know, that's a lot of money, right? So Marquise Brown is doing that exact same thing. He could have gotten more money. I guarantee he could have gotten more money than 1 year, $7 million. But Juju took 1 year, $4 million, and then he turned around and got 30 million. So Marquise Brown is saying, okay, I'm going to go to the Chiefs. I'm going to play a 1 year prove it deal. I'm going to focus on being healthy. I'm going to focus on being the best that I can be. I'm going to hopefully win a ring. And then next year, when I'm 28 years old, I'm going to get a huge bag of money. Calvin Ridley at 29 just got a massive bag of money. So Marquise Brown, I love the decision by him, assuming he can stay healthy and produce. And as we saw with Juju, it doesn't even have to be amazing for him to get paid the following year. So I think that's a very smart move by him. After that, they didn't really do much. They lost Nick Allegretti, who is a lineman that stepped in. He was like their swing lineman, stepped in and played the last two playoff games, including the Super Bowl, did really well. He's gone, but he wasn't even like a starter. Jody Fortson, another guy, not a starter, going to the Miami Dolphins. So not that big a deal there. And this team, you know, when you are the champions, you can make luxury picks. So I wouldn't rule out them drafting anything besides quarterback. Obviously, with the top, you know, these picks on the screen here, where they have 32, 64, 95. You're not going to draft a quarterback with those picks when you have Patrick Mahomes, but they could draft a wide receiver. They could draft a running back, pass down type back to complement Isaiah Pacheco, and they could draft a tight end. I mean, you know, Travis Kelce, maybe he is kind of telling them what his plans are. His brother Jason just retired. So maybe he is saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to play this year, but no promises after that. So maybe they do draft a tight end, you know? Something to keep an eye on. Absolutely. They brought in Irv Smith Jr. to give him a little tryout. So maybe they do that tight end, whatever tight end they bring in, especially if it's a high pick. That's got to have my eye on, because here's the thing that happens all the time in the NFL is the quarterbacks play longer than the other players, right? Tom Brady had a full career before Gronk. He had a career with Gronk, and then he played without Gronk, right? Like, there's a lot of these guys where it's like Travis Kelce will retire and Patrick Mahomes will continue to be elite for a long time. I want to have whoever's going to be around for that era, right? I want Rashee Rice. I want whoever's going to stick around for that era of football. So sign me up for whatever tight end. If they draft a tight end with any sort of draft capital, is a good landing spot long term. Short term, obviously, it's terrible because you're behind Travis Kelce, but long term, it's a good landing spot, no doubt about it. Las Vegas Raiders, next team here, lost Josh Jacobs, lost Jimmy G, lost Austin Hooper. A lot of the classic when you turn over to a new regime, a lot of the guys associated with the previous coach are going to be gone. You know, Brandon Bolden, maybe they keep him around because he plays on like 19 different special teams units, but a lot of those guys are going to see them move on from. You know, they did move on from Hunter Renfrow rather than Jacoby Myers. So they do like Myers, even though he was a past regime guy, but that's where they're at. So you're going to have Devontae Adams, who there's always going to be trade rumors swirling around him. But for the time being, it's Adams, it's Jacoby Myers, it's Michael Mayer, and now Gardner Minshew comes in. He's probably going to start for this team. If you have Gardner Minshew in your dynasty league, you got to be at least a little bit pumped here that this guy could have ended up being a backup. There's a lot of guys that were in a similar spot that ended up going somewhere and being backups. Justin Fields, believe it or not, was not as coveted as Minshew. I mean, like, he's a backup. He got traded for, a 6th-round pick that could be a 4th. I mean, in the future, that's not a lot of capital. Whereas Minshew got $25 million, $15 million guaranteed. And say what you like, I think there should be a competition with Aiden O'Connell. I think Aiden O'Connell has deserved the right to compete, but these teams don't like wasting money, right? They like being right with their hunches and with they place their money. Like, of course, it would be great if Aiden O'Connell just beat out Minshew and he's the man, and then you can try and get out of that Minshew contract and you have your guy for the future. But when you give a guy $15 million guaranteed, it does sting if he's not good. So Minshew's going to get every chance to start for this team. I believe, $15 million is no joke, guaranteed, and 25 total is what the contract is. This team replaced Austin Hooper with Harrison Bryant. They brought in Alexander Madison, which, again, we talked about this with Travis Etienne. That, in my opinion, is good news for Zamir White, because Alexander Madison is just not a high-end back. They didn't bring in Saquon Barkley. They didn't bring back Josh Jacobs. They didn't bring in Derrick Henry, Tony Pollard, even Gus Edwards or any of these, any of these other guys they could have brought in. They brought in Alexander Madison. That means Zamir White is absolutely in the chair to be the starter. And in my opinion, I think it's better that they bring in Alexander Madison than no one, because if they bring in no one, that makes them a real candidate to draft a running back. We don't want that. We want them to fill this room with mediocre players behind Zamir White. That's the best case scenario. So, as a Zamir White guy and fan, I think that's a good move for him. I think that's great, right? They have picks 13, 44, and 77 as their kind of killer first, top 100 picks. You could do a lot of damage with those picks, right? 13, they could take a quarterback. They could draft anything, honestly. I don't think they draft a running back or a tight end. They just drafted Michael Mayer. He's got to get his opportunity here. But they could draft a quarterback. They could draft a wide receiver. Probably it's either going to be quarterback or I don't think they draft a wide receiver with Adams and Jacoby Myers. Just not necessary. So I think if anything at 13, they pick a QB. Later on, it's a deep class, so they could take wide receiver at 44 or 77. We'll have to see. But, I'm not – this isn't one where I look at it like we did with the Cardinals last Friday, and we just say that he's the guy. Like, we just say, like, they're definitely going to draft Marvin Harrison Jr. Like, we're going to try and identify as best we can who might draft, but this team's probably not going to. And I see Anthony in the chat. Minshew or buy low on Bryce. And I see you in the chat as well, Toronto Dave. Shout out to the Toronto area. Could be a QB2 in Dynasty. Minshew could be a QB2 in your Superflex leagues. No doubt about it, right? He's got Devontae Adams, which is all you need in this world. But I would actually rather buy low on Bryce. The upside is higher. The team went out and they traded for Deontay Johnson. And they also added 2 guards, paid $150 million for Hunt. And I believe the other one was Damian Lewis. So they're doing what they can. Not to mention, Trevor Lawrence had a terrible rookie season with Urban Meyer and that old coaching staff and the GM and stuff. They turned around and fired all those people and brought in new coaches, and it just looked better immediately. Well, what happened with the Panthers? They turned around and fired everybody. They fired they fired the GM, Scott Fittering. They fired the head coach, brought in all new GM, all new coaches. They're making all these new moves. I am definitely willing to buy low on Bryce Young. And if it's bad again this year, then maybe we turn around and say, okay, that's it. But I mean, you got to give the guy a chance. Minshew is never going to just turn into like a super mega star at this stage. I'm sorry. But Bryce Young, I'm not ruling it out. So there you go. Next team, Los Angeles Chargers. Boy, this team, big changes, man. The times are a-changing. You had a team that was focused on huck it, chuck it football with Kellen Moore and all these wide receivers and a pass-catching running back and everything. And the new regime wants to do the opposite of that entirely. Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman, they want to pound the football. They want to smack you in the face. They want to slow the game down. So they went out and made that clear, right? They traded Keenan Allen. They cut Mike Williams. They lost Austin Eckler in free agency. They lost Gerald Everett in free agency. Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler, Gerald Everett were your top 3 target getters last season. And Mike Williams would have been top 4 with those guys, but he tore his ACL like 3 weeks in the season. So they basically just said, hey, you know what? We don't need to throw the ball. We're going to run it all over the place. And this is a good opportunity now for the guys that are left over. Quentin Johnson is going to get a shot, right? He's going to be a full-time player. He kind of got a shot last year. I'm not necessarily ruling him out, though I will say this. He got a lot of snaps last year, and it was pretty inefficient. That is scary, considering how efficient some guys were on limited snaps. Like, look how good Josh Downs and Jaden Reed were on limited snaps versus this guy getting the full snaps. And Jordan Addison was good on limited snaps, and then he got the full snaps, and he was even better. This guy didn't earn the snaps and then didn't do much once he got them. So maybe he still needs to develop, but he's definitely in the danger zone. Josh Palmer, shout out to the Toronto area. Second shout out to the Toronto area on the show right here. Josh Palmer, Toronto guy, Toronto Dave and the gang. He has already shown that he can produce when asked. So he's definitely, to me, the guy that's a safer pick right now. And then they have this like hodgepodge of tight ends. They brought in Will Disley. They brought in Hayden Hurst. They have Colby Parkinson. They have our guy, Stone Cold Smart, the Stone Cold Stunner. So we'll have to see how that shakes out, but they could also draft a tight end. So before we talk about the draft picks, they also signed Gus Edwards. So Gus Edwards is going to come in and be the guy. He's going to be the starting back. He played for Greg Roman with the Ravens. He's now playing for him again. If you liked Gus Edwards under Greg Roman with the Ravens, boy, you're going to love Gus Edwards under Greg Roman with the Chargers. What up, Gator J in the chat? Thanks for popping in. Yeah, shout out the Greater Toronto area, of course. Get your Leafs out. Get the Maple Leafs out, baby. Let's go. But yeah, in this draft, man, this is going to be a fun one, an interesting one. I can guarantee you that they're going to draft a player from Michigan at some point. They're going to. It might even, thing is, when the draft smooths out in the later rounds and you can kind of pick whoever you want, that's when he's at the very least going to bring in some character guys that, special teams guys. So you're definitely going to see that from Harbaugh. But this team, they could do anything, man. They're not going to draft a quarterback. They have that. The big question is at 5, right? They are probably going to draft a lineman. So let's just get that out of the way. But the fun thing would be for them to draft a wide receiver, right? Malik Neighbors or Marvin Harrison Jr. or Rome Odunze. That would be fun for most people. My quiet fantasy wishing, and I've made this clear on Twitter, would be Brock Bowers. I think it's, from an NFL standpoint, maybe not the smartest thing, but for fantasy football, my goodness, it is the perfect storm and best possible situation for Brock Bowers. If they take him there and shock the world, think about this. You've got Justin Herbert at quarterback. They just let go their 4 best pass catchers. Greg Roman designed the offense where Mark Andrews had a top 5 season all time in fantasy football, and he steps right into that role. And he would have the draft capital of a guy that went 5th overall. I would move him up in my dynasty rankings. I probably couldn't move him ahead of, in Superflex, he doesn't go ahead of the quarterbacks, and he doesn't go ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr., and he probably doesn't go ahead of Malik Neighbors. But, I mean, I'm probably putting him ahead of Rome Odunze, definitely 10 in premium. So, would be cool. It's not going to happen, though, but would be cool. Just saying. This team could also draft a running back. So, 537, 69. Keep an eye out for that. Wide receiver, tight end, running back could happen with this squad. Next team, Miami Dolphins. They signed Jonnu Smith, and I think this was a very smart signing. And this is why. This team lost Christian Wilkins. He went to the Raiders. Correct me if I'm wrong, chat. Went to the Raiders. That guy's going to give you a 3rd round comp pick back, right? So when you have guys leave and you're getting these comp picks back, if you sign incoming free agents, you cancel those out. So immediately, the Dolphins will be very careful on who they're going to sign because they don't want to cancel that out. Guys that get released or traded, they don't count against that formula. So the Falcons technically released Jonnu Smith. He doesn't count against that formula. You can bring him in and sign him, and you don't risk losing those picks. Jordan Poyer, also released by the Bills. They signed him as well. They know what they're doing. So if you're a Dolphins fan and you're like, oh, we're losing all these guys and we're not signing a lot of high-end names, just know that Will Greer and the gang, they have my approval. And I'm just a guy that writes an article on every team and does these videos. But from my standpoint, they did a good job of balancing getting those comp picks back and signing guys that can make an impact without messing up that formula. So I don't mind the Dolphins offseason, and I'm a Patriots fan, so I'm rooting against them, but I just respect when GMs, navigate things the right way and do things the right way. So shout out to them. They brought back Braxton Berrios. We talked about earlier why that doesn't matter much. It's because they use the fullback, right? Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, fullback, 2 running backs, tight end, Jonnu Smith, and Durham Smythe. You don't need a every down player. A lot of people sit back and say, we need to draft a wide receiver 3. What are you going to do with the wide receiver 3? Who's going to come out of the game to use a fullback if you draft a wide receiver? You're just going to sign yourself up for a guy that is a part-time player until Tyreek Hill leaves. You put a guy in a Jackson Smith and Jigba or Chris Godwin situation where they got to wait 2-3 years. It's not a good landing spot. So get that out of your head. This team, they are not going to draft a running back. They already hit that. They're not going to draft a quarterback. They're probably not going to draft a wide receiver. They only got 2 picks in the first 2 rounds. Tight end could be on the table. High-end tight end, that's what this team is missing from the formula. We talk about how the 49ers and how the Texans run a very similar offense. They have George Kittle. They have Dalton Schultz. You have Durham Smythe and Jonnu Smith. So maybe they do draft a high-end 2-way tight end. That's a good landing spot for what they want to do for fantasy football, they'd be behind Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. So short term, not incredible landing spot. Next team, New England Patriots. They traded away Mac Jones. They kept Mike Onwenu. They kept Hunter Henry, and I like that for them. And here's why I'm buying Hunter Henry right now. One, this team is devoid of other pass catchers. I like Pop Douglas and Kendrick Bourne as much as the next man, but how much does the next man like those players? They are fun players. They seem like good guys, but it's not like this team has Garrett Wilson. You know what I mean? So Hunter Henry has that opportunity. Two, they're going to be drafting a quarterback. Please draft a quarterback. But at least, Jacoby Brissett might even be better than Mac Jones just outright. So if they don't, that's fine too. And three, Alex Van Pelt just came over from the Browns, where the tight end did very well, right? And the tight end, David Njoku, there was only two tight ends that got 20 or more screen passes, Njoku and Evan Ingram. Hunter Henry, if he gets more manufactured touches to go along with his red zone ability, shout out TD, the Hunter knows how to get into the hen house. He's good in man-to-man. He's good with contested catches. You give that guy a few more extra sprinkles of screens or just like drawn-up plays, now he's getting closer to 80, 90, 100 targets that we need for fantasy upside. Hunter Henry's a buy for me. Gesicki's gone. No more rotation there. Farrell Brown's gone. No more rotation there. They cut Devontae Parker. He had offset language in his contract that let the Eagles sign him for $1.2 million. The Patriots are picking up the rest of that tab. They signed Antonio Gibson, who's going to do some pass catching stuff, but keep in mind, he also returns kicks. So might not, hurt Ramondre Stevenson that much. He could be more for his return ability, but Jalen Reagor, they kept him too, who also returns kicks. So hard to say. And then KJ Osborne, 1 year, $4 million, not a super impactful in my opinion. I know there's a small contingency of KJ Osborne truthers. 1 year, $4 million doesn't move the needle for me. So I think at 3, I really want them to take a quarterback. I'll respect whatever they want to do. They brought in Ben McAdoo, who's like the QB whisperer that he apparently, he wanted Patrick Mahomes. He wanted Lamar Jackson. He wanted Josh Allen. He invented all these guys. So I trust whether they drafted QB or not, I trust the decision. I want them to take one. Wide receiver could be on the table. Tackle could be on the table. You don't need to draft a wide receiver to go with your rookie quarterback because we've seen it a million times. Josh Allen was throwing to Robert Foster, and Tua was throwing to Preston Williams, and rookie Jared Goff was throwing to Kenny Britt. That was his top wide receiver, Kenny Britt, right? And these guys, they turn out fine. You know what I mean? Like, it's people say, oh, if you don't get a wide receiver, he's gonna suffer. It's like coaches coach quarterbacks. Get good coaches. Get Alex Van Pelt and McAdoo and these guys to coach the quarterback. Drafting a rookie wide receiver, that wide receiver is going to coach this quarterback. People think more about box scores than they do about development. Box score is not development. You need to develop this player, and throwing the ball to Calvin Ridley in practice is not going to develop this player. Calvin Ridley is not going to come over and coach the player. You have coaches to do that. Jacoby Brissett is going to coach this player. So enough on that. But if you want to take advantage of this stuff now, so like we talked about the best ball earlier, and I'm like Hunter Henry's a buy in Dynasty, FFPC is the main place where I play Dynasty, right? Go to my FFPC, use promo code Coop. They'll give you $25 when you deposit $35 or more. And there's 2 ways you can play. You can do a startup draft, where that's the easiest way to take advantage of a guy like Hunter Henry that's going really late, because everyone's in there and you can get him if you just reach for him a little bit. The startup draft is you start with nothing and go through and draft all the way. You draft the rookies, draft everything else, right? So you can do a startup, or you could go out and take over an orphan team, which that's a lot of fun too, because that's an existing team that someone's abandoned, right? And you come in and you basically make a list of the guys you like that they had, you keep them, and then you take all the players you don't like and you trade them away. So much fun. It's hard to do trades when you drafted all the players. Those are all your babies. When you take over one of these teams, it makes trading really easy and really fun. So I kind of like doing both. Go to myffpc.com, use promo code Coop. The link is in the description, or you can hit that QR code there and get set up there. But yeah, if I'm doing a startup and look at Hunter Henry's value, he's going to be somewhere on my team, and it's just Dynasty. You have deeper rosters. It gives you a lot more opportunity to roster some of these guys that you wouldn't draft in like a redraft league or best ball. So let's get through the last of these teams. I'm going to go quick because I kind of spent a little too much time talking about Hunter Henry there. But New York Jets, They signed Mike Williams, signed Tyron Smith. This team is going for the razor's edge approach. You've got Aaron Rodgers coming off a torn Achilles, injury prone. I mean, like Tyron Smith, super injury prone. Mike Williams already was injury prone coming off a torn ACL. Like this team is just going for it, man. They're like high risk, high reward, try and win right now while the window is open. I think it's smart. Like even again, see all the Patriot stuff behind me. I just like when teams do the right thing, what's in the best for their organization. This is the team that should be going and buying all the old players and all the injured players or whatever and say, you know what? Let's put it together. We have 1 or 2 seasons of Aaron Rodgers to try and get it done. Let's try and get it done now. Right? At picks 10 and 72, they could take a quarterback at 10, but that goes against what I just said. You know what I mean? Like you have to balance the future and now. And if the right guy's there, you take him, but that's not helping you win now. So at 10, they just needed, I think they should take the best available player that helps them win now. Maybe it's a wide receiver, but it's probably a defensive player or offensive lineman at this stage because they have Mike Williams, they have Garrett Wilson, right? They could take a tight end too. I'm not really sold on Tyler, not at 10, at like 72. I mean, if Brock Bowers is there, then yeah, do it, right? And then you can just start him at wide receiver and have Tyler Conklin in line, and your 3 wide receivers are Garrett Wilson and Mike Williams on the outside and Brock Bowers in the slot. I mean, it's not crazy. So could be something they do, but yeah, I mean, Breece Hall is awesome. They're not going to take a running back, and they kind of fixed their wide receiver problem with the Mike Williams signing. Pittsburgh Steelers, next team, a lot of movement here. Signed Russell Wilson, traded for Justin Fields. The job belongs to Russell Wilson. Next year, they have a decision to make. They can't pay Russell Wilson until the season's over because that money would go to the Broncos, right? So they have to wait for the season over. They said they plan to extend him, but play it out, right? And then they have the perfect excuse to not pay him now, play out the year, and then decide between Russell Wilson and Justin Fields in 2025. It's great. They have one decision to make on Justin Fields coming up May 2nd. They have to either pick up his 5th-year option or not. I don't think they will, right? The other thing is they have another guy that was a first-round pick, Najee Harris. They have to decide if they're going to pick up his 5th-round option. And don't be surprised when they do. Don't be surprised when they keep this guy because they like him and they like Jalen Warren. And I know people are, the Jalen Warren truthers are going to be sad about that, but teams like having multiple good players. I mean, believe it or not. And Najee Harris, quietly, has been in the league for 3 years. And over that span, he has the 4th most, he has the 2nd most carries, the 4th most rushing yards of any running back over the 3 years he's been in the league. It's only like Derrick Henry and Jonathan Taylor that are essentially ahead of this guy. Like, he is a good runner, right? It's just that they have multiple backs, so they mix and match multiple. So don't be surprised when they keep Najee Harris. And don't be sad because that's just the way it goes in this league sometimes. They traded away Deontay Johnson. That's good news for George Pickens and great news for Pat Freiermuth because Freiermuth was a guy we were going to have to fade once again, but now he has a chance to be a top 2 target on the team, right? Calvin Austin, people have been a truther on this guy for a while. Personally, this is, in my opinion, a good window to sell Calvin Austin just because this is the team that has been the best in the league at drafting wide receivers. Recently, the Packers have caught up a little bit, but the number 1 team at drafting wide receivers, why not lean into their skill set? Trade away Deontay Johnson if you're not going to extend him and then potentially draft a wide receiver. So that's what I think here. I think this team is with picks 20, 51, 84, and 98 at any one of those spots. If the right guy is there, they could take a wide receiver, and that would vaporize Calvin Austin's value. I already expect Pat Freiermuth and Pickens to get more targets than Calvin Austin, and I don't think Russell Wilson is going to support 3 fantasy relevant players. So sell Calvin Austin right now. I know people don't like to hear that kind of stuff, but that's what I would do. Titans, they signed Calvin Ridley, big money signing. Definitely hurts Treylon Burks. DeAndre Hopkins is going to be opposite him. It also hurts Chigakonkwo and Josh Wiley, the tight ends there. That's the way she goes sometimes in this game that we play. They lost Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry left for 2 years, $16 million, and they signed Pollard for 3 years, $21 million. That's $7 million per year for Pollard, $8 million for Henry. So they're just playing for the future, going with the younger back. That's just what you got to do. They kept Nick Westbrook-Akine. Whatever, the fact that he decided to stay, even though they're bringing in Ridley and they have Hopkins and Burks, I mean, just speaks to him maybe knowing that he's not that he's just a kind of journeyman type guy and being happy to be there. They only have 2 picks at 7 and 38, and I think that they did enough with the weapons that they don't, you've got now you have Will Levis, Hopkins, Ridley, Burks, Chig, Tony Pollard. You're probably not going to draft a tight ends. That's probably the most likely scenario if they're going to draft a weapon, but I don't think they do that. So yeah, I'm not too worried about this team doing that. Swamp Donkey in the chat. Shout out to the Twitch gang popping in. Twitch glasses for the Twitch gang. Swamp Donkey coming over from Twitch. I don't know if you talked about it, but how do you feel about Hollywood Brown this year in KC? I did talk about it. I talked about it for about 5 minutes. After the video is over, there will be timestamps on the this side with the chapters for each team. And I talked about Marquise Brown for a while. I like him in fantasy because of the move, and I think he's very smart to do that move, and I think he's going to get paid a lot of money next year, either by the Chiefs or somebody else. So I like the move. I think it's smart. But yeah, check that out after the video is over. We'll get the timestamps up there for you guys. Next team here is the Carolina. Where am I at here? Next team here is the what happened with the show sheet here? No, I think that's it. That's the last team. Tennessee Titans. We're done. Look at that. 1 hour, 1 minute over. 1 minute over. And that was only for Swamp Donkey that we went 1 minute over. So that's it. That's the AFC. We did the NFC last week, and it's all going to be up there, all going to be ready to rock and roll. Thank you guys for tuning in, hanging out. Gator J, Toronto Dave, Swamp Donkey, the whole gang, Ani Coop, Dustin. Thank you guys for popping it in. You guys, the reason I do this, it's like middle of March, downtime, but we're going to take advantage. If you want to take advantage now and keep the fantasy football season going, myffpc.com, promo code Coop. They'll give you $25 when you deposit 35 or more. Go in there, do a best ball team now, and draft all these guys that we know are set and solid and in place, the Nico Collins and Tank Dells. And then if you want to take advantage of your hunches, then you do the Dynasty League, right? You go and you draft the Hunter Henrys and those type guys, and you draft the talent you believe in long-term, maybe even take over an orphan team. So go to MyFFPC, use promo code Coop now. First-time depositors, they give you $25 when you deposit 35 or more. But that's it for us. Thank you guys for hanging out, and we'll catch you guys next Wednesday with our guest, Pat Fitzmaurice, to talk a little rookie talk, baby. Let's go.